The following bullets here shows the main new features in energyPRO 4.9. We have introduced load change restrictions. We have made an electrolyser built-in unit. Then we have made payments shown at timestep level. Then we have added some more output options on the dedicated units. And we tried working with speeding up the calculation or the operational strategy calculations. First, I'll jump into energyPRO and talk about these load change restrictions. We have so far in energyPRO, we have had the option of trying to minimize load fluctuations by putting on minimum operation time on units. I've tried to make this model here where we have a CHP unit, a wood chip fired CHP unit, that in the reference case here does not use any of the new load change restrictions or any load change restrictions at all. So this is our reference. And then we'll try to see with the different type of load change restrictions, how we can affect the operation of this unit. So, but maybe first of all, I should just mention what we have in this project here, or this example. We have, as I mentioned, the wood chip fired CHP. Then we have a thermal storage and a heat demand, an electricity market, and a natural gas-fired boiler. And if we just real quick look at the operation without any load change restrictions, we can see that the wood chip fired CHP is running a lot on and off, and the purpose of this example here is to illustrate how we can avoid these many fluctuations. So one of the new functionalities that we have introduced is to put a payment on or a cost, associated cost to changing the load of a unit. So I go to this alternative here down in the bottom. We have this load change payment. I've named it, and if we then take a look at the different payments here, you can see that there's a blue italic payment here, which means that this is different from the reference. And if I open this one up, you can see that we have this formula expression here, load change, and the argument here is the CHP. So this means that every time the load changes of the CHP, it has a cost of €5 per change. Then actually I've added also a reset of this payment so that this reset is not included in the operation strategy, but it then cancels out so that it doesn't affect the overall economy. So when looking at the results, we see now that in the same week as before, a lot less fluctuations. Maybe if you don't really remember, I can try to have both results on the screen at the same time. We have reduced the number of fluctuations quite a bit by introducing this €5 cost of changing the load. Furthermore, we have also, since we are putting a restriction to how it can operate, we have also decreased a bit the operation income. If we try to go back here to this payment, we can try to see how it affects the operation if we increase the payment here to, let's say, 15. I'm canceling again the payment in the results. And we can see that now it even further decreases the fluctuations. So we get, as a result, a more steady operation, because it has a cost now to change the operation. What we could also do would be to, if we now imagine that changing the load, instead of having a constant value, you could also have a value that is changing over time. So this payment here does not need to be a constant. It could also be a time series function, which would then, for instance, could be more expensive to change the load during the nighttime, for instance. So there's really a lot of options or opportunities here to reflect the cost associated of changing the load of a unit. Another way of applying load change restrictions would be to have what we would refer to as a hard constraint. This is more like a soft constraint. It doesn't need to reduce the load fluctuations if it's very economically feasible not to do it. So this is why we call this a soft constraint. A hard constraint would be that we simply do not allow the unit to change load. And this is what we have done here in this alternative load change 1. Here, if I open up the CSP unit, you can see that now this is blue italic because we've made a change in this one compared to the reference. And then I go to the operational tab, and we can see that we have now this new field here saying change load no more frequent than 3 times 60 minutes. So what does that mean? That means that the time step has a length of 60 minutes. So for each time step, we put in here a value stating that this is then we will not be able to change load more frequently than once per 3 time steps. So had I been calculating with a time step of 30 minutes, it will still say 3 here. This is the input value, but then these 60 minutes here will then be to change to 30 minutes. So let's have a look at how the operation of this one looks like. So we can see now that even though we are allowed to partial load very down to 0, it's always at least 3 hours that we have this unit at the same load level. If you remember, we had also before introducing this one, we had also these two fields here stating that an operation period shall be minimum X amount of time steps, and a non-operation period shall be minimum X amount of time steps. So when introducing that the load cannot change more frequently than 3 time steps, then of course it doesn't make any sense to have a minimum operation time of, let's say, 2 hours, because it cannot change its load more frequent than 3 hours. So this is also why we get, when we put 0 and 0 here, we get this notification that the load change frequency is longer than these minimum and non operational periods. So these will be overruled by this one. And this is of course only the case when this load change or change load no more frequently than this field has a higher value than these fields. You can of course say that this should minimum be in operation for 6 hours, and then you can either have the same load for all 6 hours or change it once. Good. That was the constraint regarding these load changes. Then we have yet another hard constraint. I'm jumping a little here. I'm jumping to load change number 3 here, this alternative here. In this one, we can see that I have now toggled on this load change restriction in the technical tab, which when I do that, I get 2 options here, either this one, which is highlighted now, maximum load change per time step, or the other one, time from one load line to the next. And I'll explain both of them. But first, this one, maximum load change per time step. When selecting this one, these options down here below the power curves gets visible, and down here you can specify how fast you can ramp up and down one of the energy types listed in the power curves. So here I have a drop down where I can choose any of the listed energy types. So in this case, I have selected electricity output, and the maximum ramp up time, I've put 3 megawatts per time step, and the same with the ramping down. Let's look at how that looks like. We can see here, remember that it was on the electricity that we put a maximum ramp up of 3 megawatt. So in all of these peaks here, we can see going from 2.2 to 5.2, it's always 3 or less megawatt that is the ramp up. The only thing that is yet to be made, as you can see here, we have here a load change of more than 3, and this is because in the starting up and the shutting down of a unit, this is still not implemented. It will be more clear if I go here to open the unit again, and then select 1 hour up and down, and rerun. Then we can see that the minimum load of the unit, it can jump up to the minimum load, and then it has this 1 hour as 1 megawatt per hour as a maximum ramping. But the startup and the shutdown is not including in this constraint yet. It is something that we will make at a later stage. And then, as I promised, I would also mention the other option here in when you have toggled on these load change restrictions, which is the time from one load line to the next. Again, the same applies, that it is not in the starting up and the shutting down part, but in the hours between, where you change the load. And when you select this one, you can see here you get this column here with load change restrictions, ramp up to, ramp down from. And here you can specify the number of minutes it takes to go from the minimum load and up to maximum load. In this case, I've specified 120 120 minutes for both. So here again, we can of course try to compare with the reference. We can see that we have altered, or we have, we can see a different pattern here clearly. We can try to increase the number of minutes and see how that affects. Say here 240, for instance. And yet again, you can see that it simply jumps to the minimum stated load. And then in between this minimum and maximum, it ramps with the speed that we have selected, or we have specified. The difference between this one, this option here, difference between this one and this one here, is that here we specify, we are able to specify this ramp up speed at different loads, whereas the other one is a constant one, all the way from the minimum load and to the maximum load. But here you would be able to put in a number of load lines and then specify that the ramp up speed changes as a function of the load. So I think that was more or less what I would like to say about the different options here regarding load restrictions. One final remark is that the more restrictions you put on to this unit, and you can of course also combine these different restrictions, but the more you put on, the longer time the solver will use to find a good solution, and the solution is also affected, of course. So you should expect that the result is getting a bit worse every time you add a restriction. We can look at the slides again here. The next one is bullet on the list here is the electrolyzer, a new built-in unit. In this project example, we have some wind turbines, PV panels, day-ahead market, this new built-in electrolyzer, hydrogen, oxygen, water, heat consumption, purchase of hydrogen, and export of oxygen. So in the payments here, we have two revenues. We are selling hydrogen and electricity. Maybe this should have been instead of purchase, it should have been named selling or exporting of hydrogen. But we are selling hydrogen and selling electricity from the PVs and the wind turbines. We can also purchase electricity, and there's an import tariff, which makes the import of electricity, we are paying more for the electricity than we are receiving when selling it. So this new electrolyzer unit, when I open this one up, you'll see a window like this, where we have first the option of selecting between two different types of electrolyzers, the alkaline and the PEM. In order for this electrolyzer to work, you must at least have a hydrogen fuel, and this hydrogen fuel, in order for the electrolyzer to calculate the right efficiencies and energy conversions, this hydrogen fuel must have a a heat value of 33.3 kilowatt hours per kilogram, and it must be measured in kilograms. You can read more about how to use this electrolyzer in our how-to guide on our homepage. You don't have to have a water input. That is optional. The same with the oxygen. You need to specify the electrical capacity, and then you need to specify at full load what is the electricity to hydrogen efficiency. Furthermore, what is the heat output at full load, and what is the minimum load? And here's with minimum, it's meant minimum electrical consumption. And as you can see, we have this efficiency versus load graph up here. This illustrates that these type of electrolyzers actually has a little higher efficiency at, I believe it is 27 or something, 27% load. And then that's the maximum efficiency, and then it slowly decreases up to full load. So in order for this to work, you should always have a minimum load that is below 25% or so. Otherwise, this curve will be a bit strange. So these are the constraints so far in this simple electrolyzer built-in unit. If you and we are working on a more advanced one, but this is the first one that has been released so far. And of course, you can always, if you want to specify these efficiencies in more details yourself, you can always make a user-defined unit and do that. But this is to assist in making an electrolyzer in your model. And we can have a look at the operation. So here we can see the heat output in this graph. We can see the electricity consumption. It follows the overall operation of the electrolyzer. We can see the wind turbines is the yellow area, and the PVs that's the green area. Then we can see the hydrogen production and the oxygen production. And of course, we could also have a look at the graph for the water consumption. Yeah, and we see that it's trying to operate mostly when the electricity prices are low, and then it partial loads when it's high. One thing that could change a lot, this picture that we're seeing here, is of course the price of hydrogen. If right now we are assuming a sell price of 3 euros per kilogram, if we reduce this, we would see that the operation of the number of hours that we are producing hydrogen will decrease. That was what I wanted to say about the new electrolyzer built-in unit. But as mentioned before, we have on our website a how-to guide, in which you can read more about it. Then I'm jumping to the next bullet here, payments shown at timestep level. For quite some time, we have been wanting to add payments on a timestep level, and we can actually use the same example here again to show that. If I click here, we can see a list of the different payments and payment groups. And we can, for instance, say, look into the payment here, purchase of electricity. If I add that one here, okay, well, maybe that's not the most interesting one, because we can see, well, yeah, here we can see it's not zero all the time. It is, of course, zero whenever the electrolyzer is getting all the electricity from the renewable sources. But when the electricity price is low enough on the market, we are actually importing electricity, and the payment hour by hour is illustrated here. You could also have a sale of electricity. And here you can see then that this graph, maybe it's not so easy to see. Let's make it darker color. You can see that it follows the excess electricity production that is not consumed by the electrolyzer. That gives a revenue here. So all these payments are now available in a timestep resolution. Furthermore, you can also go to Tools and Export Economy, and here you have the option to decide in which resolution, for instance, every hour, and you can copy to clipboard the economy hour by hour and put it in, for instance, into Excel. Next on our list is the bullet here, which is about the more outputs that we have added on some dedicated units. So this is the example where we have now introduced some more different output types than we had in the previous version. On, for instance, the PV panels, but also on the electric heat pump. And it's not included in this one, but we also have it on our built-in solar collectors. But it's the same principle as for the PV panels. We can see if we open the PV panels that everything looks just the same, except for this part down here, where we have output energy type. We have now the option of pointing to electricity or the different fuels that are in this project. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for this to be producing natural gas, but this is, you should read this as the two different fuels that are in this project here. This is a fuel, and this one is actually also just a fuel. So if I double click this fuel, which is named DC electricity, this is how it looks like. It's a restricted fuel. There's no storage, and it's measured in kilowatt hours. So the PV panels produces this DC electricity, and it goes through the inverter with the loss. You can see 750 going in, 700 going out. Okay, it's kilowatts and kilowatt hours per hour. Then we move on to the electric heat pump. Here we have done something similar. Instead, if I open it up, you can see that instead of producing heat, now we have selected process heat down here. We could also have selected heat, or again, we could have selected one of the fuels in the project. But now I have selected process heat. And one thing to remember, in order for allowing or in order to be able to select these process heat or fuels, the project and the project identification should should have toggled on delivery of both heat and process heat and fuel producing units in the project. So now the heat pump is producing, instead of heat, process heat. So what's the point of this functionality? Well, there could be many. One of them that is illustrated by this example here is that we are now producing heat that is not and a different type of energy that is not heat. We're producing that to a storage, and then we are using this booster. We could name this instead of process heat. We could name this low temperature heat, and then we say that in this booster we define the ratio between the low temperature heat, which is this one, and natural gas consumption in order to get a heat output, which has then the temperature that is required to supply the heat demand. And these ratios here could also be defined by time series functions, so that the required temperature could be something that is varying over time, and thereby this ratio between the heat from the heat pump and this boosting is something that is changing over time as well. So this is not to this is an example of how to use this new functionality, but the functionality itself is simply that on these built-in units, we now have the option of selecting a different output type than the heat and electricity for the PVs that was before. Okay, and finally, the speeding up of the operation strategy calculation. This is not something that we have that I have prepared an example to illustrate because it's sometimes quite time consuming to do that. But as most of you probably have experienced, the more energy conversion units, time series functions, payments, and so on, the more elements you have in your project, the longer time it takes for energyPRO to prepare the calculation. It's not the actual calculation done by the MILP solver, but it's just the preparation of it, which we have been working on to improve. But hopefully you, with this 4.9, feel that it's taking less time to complete the calculations. So thank you for watching, and have a nice day, everyone.